right. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Rhonda Hull. I am an end of life planning coach and consultant, and I am very blessed today, very fortunate today to have Crystal Cannon Flores as our guest. And she is a certified end of life doula working with families to create a dignified and meaningful experience for loved ones at the end of life, bridging the gap between medical care and holistic comfort. And one of the things that jumped out from her bio to me was that she facilitates an environment where loved ones can maintain their respective roles as spouses, children, family members, and friends, and through people being able to be who they are and be authentic and offer their presence as well as their skills at that time of passing, to be fully present for someone, it normalizes the process and it restores the dignity and helps alleviate fear for everyone involved. And Crystal, first of all, thank you for weathering through technological glitches, and we're just creating this opportunity to share this information. So welcome.
Thank you. I'm really, really, really happy to be here, and I want to thank you for inviting me. So I don't think we have enough of these opportunities to speak to end of life and normalize the process, as you just said. So thank you.
Yeah. And that out as the most significant place to dive into this conversation, because I have found it true for me at being able in a multitude of capacities to offer bedside care. I mean, I started as a birth doula, and now at this point in time, it's more often at an end of life doula. And most of the time it's for close family and friends, but occasionally as a doula offering those services, particularly because it takes a lot of energy and a lot of stamina, a lot of consciousness, space holding to be at a bedside and through that whole journey. And it is such a significant, important role because it frees the family members up to be fully present in that capacity while they have a guide, while they have someone who helps them alleviate the stress if they aren't familiar with the death process and with the dying process. So can you speak to that a little bit on what it means to be a death doula?
Yeah, those are all such great pointers and questions, and it really opens the pathway to me really explain what brought me to this work, which, you know, I don't think anybody goes to career day and says, I'm going to be in death care.
Yeah.
You know, yeah. I worked in a corporate sales position for most of my adult career. And then I had an experience that changed me on a cellular level, which was the experience with my parents and their death, their dying experience that was only 6 weeks apart from one another, and they were only 63 years old. So it was something I was not prepared to deal with, nor had we really had conversations about what this might look like in the future, because we, you know, obviously thought we had more time, which is pretty much most people's story. So conversations were not really, they just didn't take place in my family, not for any particular reason. It was just my parents were young parents and they were still young at 63. And so we just hadn't talked about what an end of life experience would look like for either one of them at that time. But my mom ended up getting brain cancer, and my parents were very kindred spirits. They really didn't even go to the bathroom without each other. It was, you know, it was, they did everything together. They went to nursing school together. They literally never spent any time apart except for when my mom went into the hospital. And that statement that you quoted from my bio, about, allowing each family member to be who they are and show up as they are. That is such a core value of mine in doing this work, because the experience I had, 3 weeks into my mom's process, I discovered my dad passed away in his bed.
Mm.
He was not sick. And it was devastating. It was traumatic. It was every type of complicated emotion you can imagine. But then I had to go deliver that news to my mother's hospital bed. She was still recovering from brain surgery.
Right.
And so bringing her home started my process of being her 24/7 caregiver, which I'm so grateful for. And I'm so blessed to have that experience. But now that I have the insight that I have and I'm doing the work that I do, I realized it was not the most dignified experience for my mother, because really what we want in the end is we want our people to show up as they are, as the role that they play in our life. That's what normalizes the process of end of life, is that the daughter is the daughter and the husband is the husband and the friend is the friend. And when we start, interconnecting those roles, and now the daughter is the caregiver, it strips away dignity. My mother, we really didn't even acknowledge my father's death, because we didn't know how to grieve in this complicated scenario when my mom was also dying. So brought her home from the hospital, and she had a 3-month prognosis. And, my dad died on a Saturday. My mom died 8 Saturdays later. And so it was so many complicated things pushed into just a few weeks.
Yes.
And knowing how to navigate through that is what really brought to light where all these holes are in our end of life experiences. I can't say enough about hospice. In my work, I don't partner with people that don't have hospice in place. And if they don't have hospice in place, I help get it in place. I could not do what I do without them. But in my mind at that time, I thought hospice was like what we do as doulas. I thought they were going to come and they were going to be there with me the whole time. I didn't know. I never had this experience before.
Well, a lot of people don't. So would you try to capture what the essence of both of those roles are?
Yeah. So this is where, when I say, bridging the gap between the holistic comfort and the medical necessity, is that I do something very, very different at the bedside than what hospice does. And I couldn't do what I do without them. And hospice is really warming up to what we bring, to the family, to the bedside as doulas too, because they are doing the medication and the changing of medication if it's needed, and the, supplies and the things that we need to be able to care for this person medically. But they have heavy caseloads. This is one person that they're seeing in the course of a day, which there's probably, I don't even know how many people that they're going to, but it is a drop-in visit. It is, there's a bath aide and there's a nurse visit, but they're not sitting at the bedside, which was, obviously what I thought. And so there were times in this,
like when you have a doctor midwife role versus the labor coach, the person who's taking you contraction by contraction through the process.
Yeah. And so that is really what that whole role is about, is I meet people where they're at. I do a whole consultation before we even start our process or decide that we're going to work together. When somebody calls me, I have what's called the grateful death intention. And that is something that is a requirement for me in order to make a decision if we're a good fit for each other. Because obviously, as you know, when people call us, we don't know what their life was about before they called us. We know where they're at right now. And in order to create a meaningful, sacred end of life experience, I need to have a little snapshot of who you were before illness. And so that's what the grateful death intention was birthed from, is that here I am now, trying to create this experience for my mother. And I only know who my mother is as my mother. I didn't know her before she was my mom. I didn't know what, I mean, I knew stories that I heard, but I didn't really know what her life was about and what was meaningful and sacred to her. And the time to have these conversations are not at the end of your life, and so I took so much of what I learned from that experience and really cultivated it into the business that I do today, because we don't have that. It's, we have baby showers and birthing, celebrations, and we do all this prep work to get ready for the birth of the baby, but we don't do any of that to prepare for end of life. And so here I was being, thrown into it, and I thought I would have my dad as my partner the whole time to care for my mom. And my idea was I was going to go and teach my dad how to live without my mom. That was it. That was what was going on in my mind. And so after 3 weeks of being with him and then him exiting, I felt completely lost. And I know that's how so many people feel, because we don't talk about it in advance. We don't hold conversations, over Thanksgiving dinner about, hey, mom, what's meaningful and sacred to you? So that when we have a container, I know what to do for you and what you like and what you don't like. I mean, I'm talking sensory things too. Like maybe someone doesn't like the smell of grilled onions. Well, if someone didn't know that and they're coming and they're making a meal, those conversations are really, really important to take place before you need them, because the time to do it isn't when they're in those moments. I mean, emotions are high and there's a lot of different energy elements coming in, because you've got family and friends and all of people are coming out of the woodwork. I mean, for me, it was exhausting, because I had a lot of support and a lot of love surrounding me, but I couldn't answer the basic questions like, what can I do for you?
Right.
What can I do for you? I don't know.
And it was kind of the baptism by fire that your parents gave you that really activated your own legacy. I mean, that was one of the things that I wanted to ask you. As part of you introducing yourself, knowing that the passing of your parents was such an instrumental part, how did that help clarify this role that you're talking about? And how did that birth you into this direction of being with those who are preparing to die?
Yeah, I mean, I really thought in my mind, once I started connecting all the dots, right, and seeing like, oh, why isn't there a person in place that I can ask this? And why isn't there a person in place that I can reach out to for this? Like, you don't realize what you need until you need it, right? And so here I was trying to figure out what I need when I needed it. And all these people asking me, well, how can I help you? I don't know. I can barely spell my name right now. I don't know what I need. So I had this idea that I would become a doula and I would go work with hospice and it would all be, put a little bow on it and here you go. But then I didn't realize that we are still pioneering this movement. This end of life doula movement is not a weird conversation anymore, but it's not the norm either. There's still a lot of education that has to be out there in order for people to understand that these resources are available to them. A lot of people don't know that. And so these conversations, like what we're doing right now, this is the backbone to what we need in order for this to be a normal part of a care plan, which is what I'm hoping for. I'm hoping that
I think it's another interesting piece to the evolution. You're speaking to an evolution that we're pioneering, because, up until the 1940s-ish, death was a natural process. It wasn't always a comfortable one because there weren't medical alternatives available. Then we hit this 40s to 50s where the pendulum swung completely the other direction, where death and birth became a very medicalized experience. And that awareness that knowing how to die is built into the system, and that being present for someone in that journey, we got to the point where quality of life, we could now extend it to about 70 with quality, but could keep people alive until 90 plus, but not with quality, with quantity, but not with quality. And so we're in that whole redefining, not only for those who are dying, like what does it mean? Do I need to be afraid of it? What are the things I look for? What are the decisions I need to make? But you and I both, and I know you and I both know many who are aware, like this is a profession, this is a career, this is a calling, and I don't even know what to call it. Like, how are we all going to define what hospice means, what palliative care is, what being a caregiver is? And the tricky part, because birth and death not only have this physical component to it, they have a spiritual component to it, is how do you blend those so that those people like you and me and other death doulas, hospice workers, palliative care workers, even conscious physicians, how do we provide that care and attach a value to it in a way that a broken system can recognize it, so we can charge for what we do rather than just give it away because we don't know how to ask for the time and the energy that goes into being fully present for someone. So I know that I got to participate in a workshop that you offered that started to unfold that question for all of us. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah. I want to just back up to one of the first things you said, which was about, back in the day, well, 100 years ago, we didn't have the term death doula because we didn't need it. It's what we did as community, as neighbors, as friends, as family. We were birthed at home, we died at home, and people came together in community. And then, like you said, a big shift happened, and then death and dying became a big business. And when the business side of it happened, I think that is when we really increased the amount of fear that we have around death and dying, because now we're not talking about it. So we're not talking about the things that we fear, and we fear what we're not talking about. And so it just becomes this vicious cycle that just keeps going. And then what happens is people make emotionally charged decisions at the end because, well, I need to go into debt, and I need to have a $30,000 funeral to really show everyone how much my mother meant to me. And, this is not an uncommon story. This is what happens. And so for me, it is about changing the narrative, and it's about normalizing this role as the doula, as the companion, as the person that can pick up the pieces. And the most valuable thing that the doula brings to the bedside is time, and that is the most important thing to a dying person is time. How are we spending this time together? I mean, you spoke to that earlier, having a brain cancer diagnosis and having all these logistical things that have to come into play, but really kind of tabling that and coming back to how much love can we create in this time, And so that is something that we just have not placed value in. And now that is kind of coming to light with the end of life doula movement, is that the doula comes in and fills in those gaps. We need hospice to come in and check on this person. We need hospice to come in and change up the medication if it's needed. We need hospice to come in and deliver supplies and maybe have a bath aid or whatever the logistics are, so that the people that are surrounding this person can show up and be present without having to take on a role. I don't have to come in and clean up, my mother, unless she wants that. And if that's an agreed upon thing, then that's fine. But if it's not, it's more of a dignified experience when the family member can come to the bedside and just be who they are. That's what creates dignity for someone that's dying. And then the second part of your question, kind of going into the monetary value, I do a lot of volunteer work, and I do offer discounts in my work, and I don't turn people away because they can't afford me. However, there needs to be a leveling up process that happens at this point, because a lot of heart-centered practitioners are going out there and just giving so much of themselves to do this work and then coming in their door completely depleted.
Yes.
And so we're not valuing what that work really looks like when we're just giving it all away all the time. In order to normalize it and to make this a standard part of care, it needs to be looked at through that lens. We need to understand that, you know, people's time is valuable. And I'll tell you from my own personal journey and all of this, and how I've cultivated and recultivated and kind of gone through the ebbs and flow of this business, is realizing that when you show up confidently and you show up with an open heart and love and compassion and the ability to help somebody normalize this chaotic, emotionally charged time, that is very valuable. And people do not question whether you should be paid for that or not. It's really, a lot of it is internal. We feel like we're heart-centered people. We want to do good in the world, and we do. But that doesn't mean that we walk in the door and have nothing left for ourselves and nothing left for our family because we gave it all away.
You cannot give from an empty cup. No matter how hard you may try, you cannot give from an empty cup. And so I think because it often is a role, not always, but it often is a role that women take, and because for eons and centuries, culturally, women have been trained and expected and indoctrinated into being that, to sacrifice themselves. It's something that you and I and all of those who want to step into this field, it is for us to set that importance on our self-care so that we can serve authentically.
That's right. And you said it perfectly. It's expectation. It's the expectation. And that's the norm that needs to change. Is, you know, people value your time when you value your time and you value yourself and you show up and you are able to kind of map out, I can see you're here. I can see that there's a need for this. Is this helpful to you? I mean, I would have loved somebody to, during my time, say, you know, here's a list of some things. Does any of this look like something that would be helpful to you? Because that helps me give my brain the break that it needs. Because when people are asking you, how can I help? What can I do? You don't know. And it's hard to answer. And that pressure builds. And then you end up isolated because you feel like you've got to show up in order to meet their expectations. And then it's just this whole big ball of emotional confusion.
Right.
And so being able to show up confidently, being able to show up with resources, being able to show up with an open heart and meeting people where they're at and understanding where the need is, that is a job. That is a calling.
I have always found that although people are very fearful about talking about that taboo topic, that once you give permission, once you model that it's not a scary topic to have, then the joy gets to come back into that. It can be bittersweet. It's not an easy journey, but it is an inevitable part of the journey of life for all of us, is death. And to me, death is always there as the reminder to live the moment that we have fully, however many they are remaining.
That's right. And that is really what you were saying about what does what is that bridging the gap look like, and what does the doula bring? I mean, that's it right there. You know, you're coming in, you're filling in those holes, you're creating a meaningful, sacred environment so that when people come into this space, they feel comfortable. And if they feel comfortable, then the person that's dying, because you also said this earlier, which is so true, we know how to die. We do. We've been doing it since the day we were born. There's no question about it. But what we get really distracted by is our existential environment. You know, is this person uncomfortable? Am I a burden for this person? Are the dishes clean? Someone's coming to visit, like all these things that preoccupy our mind. So we lose focus of, I'm dying.
Right.
This is a sacred time.
So in circumstances where people are aware, they become aware that their time, I mean, we all hopefully hold an awareness that we're here for a brief period of time. But if you reflect back on during the time of your parents' passings, it's like my dad passed quickly. He dropped dead of a heart attack. My mom, it was a more gradual decline. And then the last 2 weeks were a very, very precious time. So during that time, how do people find and vet a doula? How do they reach out to hospice? I heard a statistic today driving that I need to research further. I heard that only about 20% of the people who need palliative care get access palliative care in their end days. And to me, that is such an essential piece of what a birth doula or a death doula rather can help, and hospice can help facilitate for someone, is making sure that their pain is managed, that their comfort is managed.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's essentially doing what we're doing right now, talking about it before you need it. And that's not available to everybody because that's just not the norm. But once it becomes the norm, that is really essentially how things are really going to nicely come together. Because if we talk about it in advance, people are out there doing this now. They're getting a surrogate in the event that they get a dementia diagnosis. They're lining up a potential doula. People are doing these things. It's just not the norm. And in order to make it the norm, we have to do what we're doing right here, which is talking about it, educating, workshops, like reaching people before they need us. That is the best way to make sure that, I mean, I'm 50. I don't think I'm going to die in the next few months. I don't know. I might. I don't think so. But if I do, I can tell you for sure that my family knows what I do and don't want done with my end of life experience.
The plan it is actually likely not going to happen where every little checkbox is fulfilled. Yeah. However, by having had the conversation, people are aware of the essence of what you want. And so that even when the big things you don't get to have, you can find one little fragment of it in a simple pleasure that can fulfill what that underlying desire was, for freedom.
So, yeah, I'll just share an experience that it struck a chord so deep that it really created the Grateful Death intention, which was, my mother grew up in a very Catholic, I think I shared this at the workshop. She grew up in a very Catholic home. And when she was of age, she left home and she left the church. And I did not grow up in a Catholic environment, except for when I was with my grandparents. And so when my mom was dying and she went, she was transitioning. She was definitely more non-responsive than responsive. And when she was responsive, we weren't engaging in conversation. But I could really feel I could feel that she was hanging on to something. I could feel that she wasn't letting go of something. And I couldn't figure it out because I didn't know, I don't know. So I was coming up with all kinds of hippy dippy things that let's do a fire release, let's do a water release, I'm just doing all these ceremonial things that I can think of that would speak to her. And then we had a family friend that said, she's waiting for last rites. And I said, no, not my mom, because I knew how she felt about her religion that she grew up with. And I was like, no way, not my mom. But this is that component of, going back and having conversations about what life was like in your primary state. And that is exactly what hospice explained to me, that, people sometimes in the dying process, they'll go back to a primal state of mind, which is exactly what happened with my mom. She was calling me daddy. She knew I was caring for her. And in her mind, she knew mommy, daddy, sister.
Right.
And so guess what? We called in the priest. We got her last rites, even non-responsive. She had tears streaming down her face, and she passed.
Right.
And
You know,
if I didn't have a friend that would have brought that to the table, I wouldn't have thought of it. So
yeah,
it's
the dying process to me is like a parfait. You know, it has all of these levels and layers. And I experienced a near-death experience when I was 17, and others that brought me close to death, but not with that sense of that takes me beyond words. I can't even, there it goes. I mean, I can't. And what I know is, as years later, as I really studied the phenomenon, the understanding, the very essence of what a near-death experience is, part of that journey is, if you were raised Buddhist, you'll witness Buddha or a lotus. If you are raised in a fundamental Christian, it's the pearly gates. If it's Catholic, you see the rosary and the Virgin Mary. And so those are all layers, levels. Like you could say on the surface, well, I saw Buddha, but you saw Jesus. It's like, no, it's the same. You're just on this incredible journey of releasing through all of those layers through the veil. And to me, both at birth and at death, that veil, to be with someone at those moments where we enter into this reality and then we have our final exhale. We come in with an intake of breath and we release with an exhale of breath. And it's just pretty amazing. So it is a spiritual experience, not just for the family members, but it's an incredible honor to be welcomed into that sacred space, whether you're religious or not. There's just a very special time.
That's very sacred. People say, you know, when people meet me and when I do events or workshops, or you really just don't look like somebody that works in end of life. You look happy. I am happy. I guess I look happy because I am happy, and because I feel so privileged to do this work. In this work, I help people how to die with meaning, and they teach me how to live with meaning. It is such a beautiful exchange that I can't imagine doing anything else, career-wise or otherwise, in my life. Like it all comes together, and it's so beautiful, just like you said, you know, the inhale, the exhale, and everything in between. It's sacred. It is sacred.
You and I both are, I feel very fortunate to live in Washington State, where death with dignity is a thing, that medically assisted death is a thing, medically assisted passing. And it's an evolving thing. My hope is that eventually everyone will have, I believe we all need to have choice around our birth and around our death. And so here in our state, we have medically assisted death, or death with dignity. And can you speak a little bit? I want to make sure that I capture your input on that, just like people now can be aware of what hospice is, what palliative care is, what a death doula is. What is death with dignity? And death with dignity, I am aware, and I don't know if all of our listeners are, that there are certain requirements that have to be met in order to qualify for medically assisted death. And there is an option that I know that you are well versed in, called V.S.E.D, which is voluntary suspension of eating and drinking. That is another option for those who don't qualify for the medically assisted death. So can you speak to those two choices a little bit?
Yeah. So I am a volunteer with End of Life Washington, and I assist people that want to utilize the law and take medication to hasten their death, but they do need to qualify, and you have to have a 6-month or less prognosis, just like you would need to qualify with hospice. What's interesting now, though, is V.S.E.D has sort of been looked at through the lens of, well, that's my next option if I can't get the medication. But that's shifting a little bit now, and people are choosing V.S.E.D as their first option. And they're choosing it as an alternative to hasten their death, even if they do qualify. This has happened because it is a more organic, natural way to go. It gives them the opportunity to create closure and have time with their family. It is something that they have control over, as far as I'm choosing a date when to start, I'm organizing. That is a big part of what I do. When I do V.S.E.D, I do a lot of the organizational side, meeting with you in advance, putting the logistics together as how do we prep, how do we prepare for this and organize a care plan, a care team, covering certain hours, supplies, all of the things. The most important thing with V.S.E.D is the prepping and the planning. Once the prepping and the planning is done and the date is set and we start the process, well, then it's, the person that is choosing to do V.S.E.D, we are really on their energetic level, and we're doing what they are ready to do when they're ready to do it. But the planning and the prep part is the most important part of the journey, because that is what makes it seamless. That is what creates harmony in this environment. So it is nice, and it's more than, it's not nice, isn't even the right word. I am a huge advocate for end of life choices, and we should have that ability to do that. Everybody should.
But whether it is the pursuing the option of medically assisted death or V.S.E.D, on more than one occasion, in talking to those people who are exploring what their options are, they assume that because medically assisted death is legal in Washington, and V.S.E.D really is available to all of us anywhere, all the time, they assume, though, that they will automatically get the support of their doctor. So please speak to the role of the physician in both of those choices. And also, just one of the things that I am aware is a growing reality here in Washington State is that many of the hospitals are either being bought up by or creating affiliations with Catholic hospitals, and then adopt Catholic protocol to their version of ethical choices. So can you speak to those?
Yeah. So as far as things go with, the way I navigate through this is I have a couple of hospices that I tend to lean towards, especially if someone that calls me does not have a hospice in place at the moment. I like to go to the hospice organizations that are not affiliated with religion. So my two favorites are Evergreen and Kaiser. They're both very progressive. They're both very well versed, and they also have people that are a part of their organization that have participated in these types of end of life experiences. So I've had really good luck with being able to connect with the hospice organizations that support hastening your death. However, that's not always the case. And if somebody is with—
Not all hospices are the same.
Exactly. And if somebody is with another hospice organization that I know will be complicated for me to be able to support them in the way that they want, I will recommend that we change it together, and I can help facilitate that, or that they think about, where are the priorities, because your doctor's support and participation in both of these scenarios are really important. And with medical aid in dying, you have to have physician signatures in order to even qualify anyway. So there's logistical paperwork that has to happen on that side of it. And sometimes, and it happens quite often, that people may or may not have a doctor that supports them, or may not even have a doctor at all. And so
it's another reason why it's so valuable to start having that conversation early, not only with your family members, but your primary care doc.
Exactly. The beautiful thing is, like you said, we live in Washington. We're very progressive. We have a lot of support here. And so with End of Life Washington, they do an incredible job of being able to connect people with doctors that will support them. If the client cannot get physician support on their end, then End of Life Washington will step in and help them get what they need. With V.S.E.D,
for death with dignity.
yeah. And then with V.S.E.D, with me, it's really important when I talk about the prep and the planning part of it. This is part of it. Having your physician on board is critical, because if you go into the V.S.E.D process and you don't have an existing prognosis, hospice like Kaiser and Evergreen will come in to do an intake after day 2 or day 3 of you having no food or fluids. But those days, it sounds simple to people. Oh, I can stop eating and drinking. You can stop eating and you can live a long, long time like that. But we are not formulated, hardwired to die of thirst. And that is essentially, voluntary suspending eating and drinking is more about dehydration.
Right.
I have met with a lot of clients that have no appetite and are just skin and bones, but they still could potentially have a long V.S.E.D process if they're hydrating. Our bodies are very remarkable. It doesn't take much. And so, and that's, really, really important to have your physician support. So those days that you're prepping and getting ready to go into your V.S.E.D process, and then also those days in between when you have me, but you don't have the hospice intake yet, you need medication. You need medication to be able to help you relax and not get anxious and make you comfortable. And these are conversations that are very delicate and very sensitive and very, very important to have prior to selecting your date and getting your care in place, your team in place. You need to have these logistical things worked out, because if you don't, you're setting yourself up for not a harmonious experience. Having people being able to support you and understand what's going on before we start the process is how you create a harmonious process. And so your physician support is important. And if you don't have that, then there are plenty of people in our circle that can help you get it. But it is important to acknowledge that and speak to that before you need it. I don't know if I answered all your questions.
Yes, and with the voluntary suspension of eating and drinking need not be a painful experience if you have adequate support through hospice and palliative care.
And I want to just speak one more thing to that, because what's happening in my world is the people that are finding their way to me because they want to do V.S.E.D are typically people that are having diagnosis with dementia.
Yeah.
And so they don't qualify, obviously, for medical aid in dying, so they can't get the medication. And so V.S.E.D is a very nice option, but you have a window, you have a window of opportunity to capture a lot of moving parts in order to make this happen. And in those moments, it's important to have a conversation about having a surrogate, and sometimes a surrogate is not a family member, because this person is in place to say, okay, look, Rhonda, you said when you could no longer navigate the fork to your mouth, or you could no longer dress yourself, you could no longer all these things, that's when you want to start your V.S.E.D process. And I'm here to tell you that this is where we're at. You are not going to realize that these things are happening all at once. And so I feel very passionate about that component. I think it's worth, talking about, having these conversations way before you need them, talking about, a surrogate. People don't even know what a surrogate is sometimes. Having someone in place that's going to say, hey, these are the things we spoke about. These are the things that are important to you. And these are the things that are happening right now. Let's talk about your V.S.E.D, experience now. Those things are really, really important. And that's where I can come in and assist and help people, even facilitate conversations within their family. Sometimes it's hard to even figure out, how do I sit down with mom and tell her these things are happening? Or how do I sit down with my kids and say, hey, you know, I want to own my end of life experience. These conversations, we are so unskilled in doing that we need that guidance. We need that support system to say, you know, it doesn't have to be hard, but it does have to happen.
Right.
We can do it like this. We can do it like this. We can do it like this.
Well, Crystal, it's such, you and I both agree how valuable this conversation is. And I really feel by us capturing conversations that people can then listen at their convenience and be able to kind of navigate themselves through to find specifically the information they need. So I really, really appreciate what you have shared today. And I'm hoping you can share a little bit now about how people find your services, and maybe describe a little bit more about what Grateful Death and your services are and how they can help you.
Yeah, thank you. So my company is called The Grateful Death. It's not affiliated with the band. So I'm a fish fan and a dead fan, but it didn't work. So what I offer is care, comfort, and coaching for end of life. And that takes on a lot of different roles. It really is about meeting people where they're at. A lot of what I do is, you know, people think if you're a death doula that you are just going from bedside to bedside helping people die. And the most misconception is I don't bring death to you. I don't walk in the door with death in my backpack. I'm like, here we are, let's do death. You know, it looks differently for a lot of different people. Sometimes being a death doula means I'm holding a conversation on a phone with someone who doesn't want to continue chemo, but they don't know how to tell their family because their family's holding out for a miracle and they just don't want to fight anymore. Sometimes it's just like you said earlier, allowing that conversation to take place, allowing them to say what they want to say, the way they want to say it, unguarded, unfiltered. That is a form of release. And then there's so many of the logistical things. I love that you like doing paperwork because I don't. So when people need paperwork done, I know where to go. But, you know, we wear a lot of different hats. It could be bedside care. It could be coaching for newly, you know, graduated doulas. Right. It could be the Grateful Death Intention is a $10 download from my website. And it is a beautiful story of you. And it is a great little legacy gift to pass on to your loved ones afterwards. I wish I had the answers to the questions that are in the intention. I wish I had those, but I never thought to ask them. And by the time I thought to ask them, it was too late. And so you can find me at thegratefuldeath.org, Crystal at thegratefuldeath.org. You can Google me. You can find me on Instagram. I'm here to help, just like you.
And you're located in Seattle, is that correct?
I'm in Seattle. Yep. And I cover a lot of areas, and I do virtually everywhere. So, you know, these days you can help people anywhere because you've got Zoom, you've got cell phones, you've got FaceTimes, you've got all of it. So
yeah, I think that's one of the things that COVID gave us the gift of bumping into our mortality, and then to recognize that we can be anywhere we choose to be with a little bit of help from Zoom, but sometimes technology, you and I both faced glitches this morning, but we can be there as quickly as our heart can take us there. And so I really appreciate your time, your wisdom, your just practical advice. And I'm grateful that now everyone will have the opportunity to connect with you. And I know that I feel very grateful to have met you through an organization that a couple of other women here in where I live in Port Townsend, Washington. We started dyingmattersguild.com, Dying Matters Guild, for a place for all of those caregivers too, all of the death workers, all of the different avenues that are support services for the dying, so that we all can become aware of one another and support one another in helping someone have a good death. So, and
I'm so grateful to you for all the same reasons. And I couldn't do what I do without being able to to have a voice out there, and it's people like you and me and Dying Matters Guild and all of us collectively. I mean, that's what it's about. We create this community in this container so people can have conversations. Those conversations are what normalizes it. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank
We will
you.
talk soon.
Yes.